10 weeks into his 4-month tour in Afghanistan, his carefully concealed presence on the front line had been busted by the press. Harry's heart sank. It was February 2008, and he was on duty near the former Taliban stronghold of Musa Qala in the northern Helmand province, with a 7-strong Spartan vehicle team. Within minutes of learning that the secret of his Afghan deployment was out, Harry felt a tap on his shoulder. It was his commanding officer. "Lieutenant Wales, pack up your bag. You're off." I think that moment was a very painful one. He was just gone, ripped away from the one place where he finally felt useful. For Harry, this wasn't just a mission, it was his shot at dignity. No sooner had the Ministry of Defense, in its infinite unwisdom, announced Harry's deployment in Iraq than the tabloid press GPS worked out where he'd be stationed. And inevitably, a radical cleric, Muqtada al-Sadr, issued credible threats to Harry's life based on that information. The third in line to the throne would be regarded as a bullet magnet who could endanger everybody else around him. In May, the MOD abruptly canceled his deployment to Iraq. The 22-year-old prince was gutted. "We'd have had a really shattered, disgruntled, sapped morale-wise individual on our hands who can kick up and be dangerous if he wants to be," said Lowther Pinkerton. There was plenty of evidence of that already. Temperamentally, Harry was a human IED. At Eton, he regularly got into fights that turned physical. It's hard not to feel for Harry in this moment. He'd trained for Iraq, wanted to serve, and was suddenly told he couldn't go because his very presence made everyone else a target. That's rough. So yes, this moment in his 20s is heartbreaking, but it's also textbook Harry. All emotion, no outlet, and the fire building until it bursts. The headlines may have changed, but the tantrum's been there all along. What we see now is just that same storm, only with more press, more pressure, and a louder megaphone. The army really saved him, you know. While William was struggling at St. Andrews, Harry was getting into all sorts of trouble. Partying all the time, drinking too much, smoking weed, insulting a French staffer, getting into fights with photographers. His response to all this? "Maybe it's just part of who I am." Being a soldier was critical to Harry's self-image. He said he could easily see himself spending 35 or 40 years in the army. Military life was his passport to anonymity. Both Clarence House and Sandhurst made it clear that Officer Cadet Wales would be treated just like everyone else. His warrant officer famously said at the time, "Prince Harry will call me sir, and I will call him sir, but he will be the one who means it." I think this scene captures one of the most genuine sides of Harry we ever get to see in the book. No titles, no tabloid frenzy, just mud, boots, and grit. In the military, Harry wasn't the spare, he was a comrade. That's why this part of his life feels almost sacred to him. It's the one place he didn't have to explain himself. The two brothers did their helicopter flying training at the same time in 2009. Harry flew an Apache armored attack helicopter, which should do about 200 knots at 10 feet above the ground, doing 39 functions at once, firing guns in every direction. Whereas William would fly this big beast of a search and rescue aircraft, working out a straight line towards it and hammering his way through the storm, picking somebody out of the ocean. It's a classic description of the two blokes. I love this bit. It's such a poetic encapsulation of the brothers. Harry, the wild gunner in a storm of firepower. William, steady and focused, navigating through chaos to save someone. While the rest of the royals were eating Christmas pudding, Harry was eating curried goat meat with Gurkha soldiers in the desert of Afghanistan. In many ways, the fates had conspired to pluck him from a war in Iraq that people hated and insert him instead into a battle theater, Afghanistan. It took 10 weeks for the anonymity deal with the press to fall apart. He was just very sad about it. He'd had 2.5 months of normal life, and only normal because it was war. His flight home had been traumatic. On board were 2 seriously wounded British soldiers. Their silent suffering later inspired him to found the Invictus Games, which enable wounded veterans to reclaim their sense of worth in competitive sports. So I feel this experience gave Harry something he desperately needed, grounding. And for a brief window, it showed what he could be when his grief had structure, when his need to be more than just the spare was channeled into service. But I also think this moment highlights the ongoing contradiction in Harry's story. He wants the grit of real life without the exposure. He wants to be both soldier and prince, shielded and seen. And when that balance collapses, it always circles back to the same narrative, that the world has wronged him. The Invictus Games were a brilliant outcome, no doubt. the media agreement that Miguel had negotiated, Harry was expected to sit down in front of television lights and do an on-camera interview for the press pool. Still shaken from the sight of the seriously injured soldiers on the flight, he admitted experiencing shock and a bit of a choke in his throat. William, watching from the back of the room, sensed how fragile his brother was beneath his media facade. He suddenly stood up and drew his hand across his neck in a gesture that said, "Cut." It was simply a brother realizing that at that point nothing was more important than his brother's welfare, and none of the other agreements mattered. I think this is where the whole chapter just stops you. William was just being a big brother. No media agreement, no decorum, just raw, instinctive care. This moment, it was as close as they'd ever come to saying, "It's us against the world." My heart goes out to those two young brothers, just trying to survive their grief while navigating the impossible complexities of being the heir and the spare. So much of Harry's life has been lived in extremes: pampered palace guest one day, frontline air controller the next. But this chapter doesn't just show us the hero or the hothead. It shows us the boy who wanted to earn his place, not just inherit it. And for a few short months, in the mud and dust of Helmand, he did. This book is getting better every chapter for me. Hope you guys are enjoying it just as much.